The night before the wedding, she texted someone one more time for old time's sake. Sent him our hotel room number. I switched rooms. Watched from the hallway as he knocked. She opened it in lingerie. I sent a screenshot to her dad. Then checked out. So there I was, 3 years into what I thought was the relationship of my dreams with Sophia. We'd met at a coffee shop downtown where she was reading some philosophy book and I was pretending to understand the financial reports I was supposed to review for work. She had this way of tucking her hair behind her ear when she was concentrating that made my chest tighten in the best possible way. 6 months later we moved in together. 2 years after that I proposed on the beach where we had our first real fight and made up by building sandcastles like idiots. The wedding was set for the Grand Meridian Hotel, one of those places with marble everything and chandeliers that cost more than my car. Her father, William, was paying for the whole thing because apparently selling medical equipment to hospitals makes you rich enough to throw around $50,000 like pocket change. The guy had this intimidating presence, always wore perfectly pressed suits and had a handshake that could crack walnuts. But he'd taken to me surprisingly well after I helped him fix his classic Mustang one weekend. Everything was lined up perfectly. The rehearsal dinner went off without a hitch. Sophia's maid of honor gave a speech about how we were soulmates, and even my best man managed not to embarrass me with stories about college. We'd gotten adjoining rooms on the 7th floor, room 714 for me and 716 for her, following some old tradition about not seeing each other before the ceremony. The wedding was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon the next day, followed by a reception that would probably go until midnight. The first weird thing happened during the rehearsal dinner when I noticed Sophia kept checking her phone and smiling at messages. When I asked who was texting her so much, she said it was just her college roommate sending funny memes to calm her nerves. But I caught a glimpse of the contact name when another message came in, and it definitely wasn't her roommate's name. It was just a single letter, which seemed strange for someone she talked to all the time. Then during the toasts, her cousin mentioned something about how Sophia had always been boy crazy in college and how she dated this one guy Ryan for 2 years who was apparently the love of her life before she met me. Sophia's face went completely white when her cousin said this, and she quickly changed the subject, but I filed that information away in the back of my mind. After dinner, we went back to our separate rooms, and I was lying in bed around 11 trying to calm my nerves when I heard her voice through the thin walls. She was talking to someone on the phone, and at first I figured it was just last-minute wedding jitters, maybe calling her sister or something. Then I caught fragments of what she was saying, and my blood turned to ice water in my veins. She was talking to someone named Ryan, the same Ryan her cousin had mentioned at dinner. From what I could piece together through the wall, this wasn't just any casual conversation. She was telling him how much she'd missed him, how she'd been thinking about their time together in college, and how she wished things had worked out differently between them. The conversation went on for maybe 20 minutes, and I pressed my ear against the wall like some kind of creep, but I had to know what was happening. The last thing I heard clearly before she hung up was her saying something about one more time for old time's sake, and then she was giving him our hotel room number. Not her room number, our room number, which meant she thought I was still in 714. She told him to come up in an hour and to be quiet because the hallways had thin walls. My hands started shaking as I realized what was about to happen, and I had maybe 60 minutes to figure out what to do next. But then something even more disturbing happened. About 10 minutes after she hung up with Ryan, I heard her making another phone call. This time she was talking to someone else entirely, someone she called Honey, and telling them that tomorrow would be the last time they'd have to pretend, because after the wedding she'd have access to my bank accounts, and we could finally be together properly. She was talking about some plan they'd been working on for months, something about waiting until after the honeymoon to make their move. That's when I realized this wasn't just about one night of cheating with an ex-boyfriend. This was something much bigger and much more calculated than I'd imagined. My brain went into overdrive, running through possibilities like a computer processing data. I could confront her directly, but then it would just be my word against hers, and she'd probably come up with some explanation about how I misunderstood everything. I could pretend to be asleep and catch them in the act, but that seemed like a recipe for a complete disaster that would traumatize everyone involved. Then I had what might have been either the most brilliant or most insane idea of my life. I grabbed my key card and headed down to the front desk, where a night clerk named Benjamin was half asleep over a crossword puzzle. I told him I needed to switch rooms because of a plumbing issue, and since the hotel was only about half full, he was happy to move me to room 708 on the same floor without asking too many questions. But before I left the desk, I asked him something that had been bothering me. I asked if anyone else had requested information about our rooms or tried to get duplicate key cards. Benjamin checked his computer and told me that actually, yes, someone claiming to be Sophia's brother had called earlier that day asking about room numbers and whether there were any connecting doors. When I told him Sophia didn't have a brother, His face went pale, and he immediately pulled up the security footage from the lobby. What we saw on that footage made my stomach drop. Around 3 in the afternoon, while we were all at the rehearsal, Sophia had come down to the lobby with a man I didn't recognize. They'd spent about 15 minutes talking to different hotel staff members, and from their body language, it was clear they were planning something together. This wasn't just Ryan she was meeting. This was someone else entirely, someone who'd been helping her set up whatever scheme she was running. Benjamin printed out still frames from the security footage showing Sophia with this mystery man, and I took them back upstairs with me. I moved my stuff as quietly as possible to room 708, then positioned myself in the hallway around the corner from room 714, where I had a perfect view of the door but was hidden behind a housekeeping cart that someone had left out. About 40 minutes later, Ryan showed up, and I have to admit the guy looked exactly like what you'd expect from someone Sophia would cheat with. Tall, athletic build, wearing a leather jacket like he thought he was in some kind of movie. He had flowers in one hand and what looked like a bottle of champagne in the other, which meant this wasn't just a quick hookup, but a full romantic evening he'd planned out. He knocked on the door to 714, and after a few seconds it opened. Sophia was standing there in this black lace lingerie set that I'd never seen before, which meant she'd bought it specifically for this occasion. She pulled him inside quickly, looking both ways down the hallway, first to make sure nobody was watching. If she'd looked a little harder, she might have spotted me, but people see what they expect to see, and she expected the hallway to be empty. But then something happened that I definitely wasn't expecting. About 15 minutes after Ryan went into the room, the elevator opened again, and the mystery man from the security footage stepped out. He was carrying a laptop bag and what looked like some kind of electronic equipment. Instead of going to room 714, he went to room 716, Sophia's actual room, and let himself in with a key card. That's when I realized this whole thing was even more complicated than I'd thought. Sophia wasn't just cheating on me with Ryan. She was running some kind of elaborate con with this other guy, and they were using the wedding as cover for whatever they were planning to do. I took photos of everything with my phone. Ryan going into 714, the mystery man going into 716, and the security footage stills that Benjamin had given me. Then I started putting together a timeline of what was really happening, and the picture that emerged was absolutely terrifying. I pulled out my phone and opened up the messaging app, scrolling through my contacts until I found William's number. Sophia's father had given me his personal cell phone number a few months earlier when we were planning a surprise birthday party for her, and he told me to call him anytime if I needed anything. Well, I definitely needed something now, but it wasn't what either of us had expected. I sent him the photos I'd taken along with a message explaining what I discovered, including the security footage showing Sophia with the mystery man and the phone conversations I'd overheard. I told him I thought something much bigger was going on than just cheating, and that he needed to get to the hotel immediately. 3 minutes later, my phone was buzzing with an incoming call from William, and when I answered, he sounded like he was barely containing his rage. But it wasn't just anger about the cheating, it was something else entirely. He told me that he'd been getting some strange phone calls over the past few weeks from someone claiming to represent a law firm, asking questions about his will and Sophia's inheritance. He'd assumed it was just spam, but now he was starting to think it might be connected to whatever she was planning. Then he dropped a bombshell that made everything else pale in comparison. He told me that 3 months ago, someone had tried to access his business bank accounts using Sophia's personal information, and his bank had flagged it as suspicious activity. When he'd asked Sophia about it, she'd claimed someone must have stolen her identity, and he'd believed her because why wouldn't he trust his own daughter? But now, with everything else that was happening, he was starting to think that Sophia had been planning this wedding as part of some elaborate scheme to get access to both his money and mine. The timing was too perfect, the mysterious phone calls too convenient, and the whole situation too well orchestrated to be just a simple case of pre-wedding jitters and cheating. William said he'd be there in 10 minutes, and I should stay exactly where I was until he arrived. While I was waiting, I decided to do a little more investigating on my own. I used the hotel's guest Wi-Fi to do some research on the mystery man from the security footage, and what I found made my blood run cold. Using reverse image search on the security photos, I was able to identify him as someone named Marcus Chun, and when I looked him up online, I found out he had a criminal record for identity theft, credit card fraud, and something called romance scams. This wasn't just some random guy Sophia had met. This was a professional criminal who specialized in exactly the kind of scheme it looked like they were running on me and her father. When William arrived, still in his pajamas but with a hotel bathrobe thrown over them, I showed him what I'd found about Marcus Chun. His face went through about 6 different expressions as he realized how deep this conspiracy went, and then he did something I never would have expected. He pulled out his own phone and called someone he identified as his private investigator, someone he apparently kept on retainer for business security issues. Within 20 minutes, This investigator, a woman named Janet, had arrived at the hotel with a briefcase full of electronic equipment and a very serious expression. She told us that she'd been tracking Marcus Chun for months as part of another case, and that he was part of a larger network of criminals who specialized in targeting wealthy families through romantic relationships. According to Janet, the typical pattern was for someone like Marcus to identify a target family, then recruit a family member or romantic partner to help them gain access to financial information and accounts. They'd usually wait until there was some major life event, like a wedding or inheritance, when large amounts of money would be changing hands and security might be more relaxed. The whole thing was so much bigger than just Sophia cheating on me the night before our wedding. This was organized crime, and I'd been the mark in an elaborate long-term fraud scheme that could have cost William and me hundreds of thousands of dollars. Janet set up surveillance equipment in the hallway while William and I prepared for what she called a controlled confrontation. The plan was to get both Sophia and Marcus together in one room where we could record their conversation and get them to admit what they were planning. Janet had legal authority to make citizens' arrests if necessary, and she'd already called her contacts at the police department to have backup standing by. At exactly midnight, William knocked on the door to room 714 with the kind of authoritative pounding that probably woke up half the floor. When Sophia opened it, clearly expecting it to be room service or maybe hotel security with a noise complaint, her face went through about 6 different expressions in 2 seconds. First confusion, then recognition, then absolute terror as she realized her father was standing in the hallway while she was wearing lingerie and had another man in the room behind her. But the real surprise came when William pushed past her into the room and we discovered that Ryan wasn't alone in there. Marcus Chun was sitting at the desk with his laptop open, and spread out around him were printouts of what looked like bank statements, credit reports, and legal documents. This wasn't just a romantic rendezvous. This was a full-scale planning session for whatever they were going to do after the wedding. Ryan tried to run when he saw William and me, but Janet was blocking the hallway, and she had handcuffs ready. Marcus, on the other hand, was surprisingly calm about the whole situation, like getting caught was just an occupational hazard he'd learned to deal with. He started talking immediately, trying to negotiate some kind of deal where he'd give up information about the larger criminal network in exchange for reduced charges. What came out in the next hour was absolutely mind-blowing. Sophia hadn't just met Marcus recently. She'd been working with him for over a year, long before she'd even agreed to marry me. The whole relationship, the engagement, even moving in together, had all been part of an elaborate setup to gain access to my financial information and establish herself as someone who would inherit money if something happened to me. According to Marcus, the plan was for them to wait until after the honeymoon, then gradually drain both my accounts and William's business accounts using the access Sophia would have as my wife. They'd been planning to make it look like a series of investment opportunities gone wrong, so that by the time anyone realized what had happened, the money would be untraceable and they'd be living in some country without extradition treaties. But the most shocking revelation was that I wasn't their first target. Marcus had been running similar schemes for years, and Sophia had been his partner in at least 3 other operations before me. They targeted men who were financially stable but emotionally vulnerable, men who were looking for serious relationships and were willing to move fast when they thought they'd found the right person. The whole coffee shop meeting where we'd first encountered each other hadn't been coincidence. It had been carefully orchestrated after they'd researched my habits and figured out where I was most likely to be at specific times. Even the book she'd been reading was chosen specifically because my social media posts had mentioned my interest in philosophy. When Sophia realized that Marcus was telling us everything, she completely broke down and started alternating between begging for forgiveness and threatening to claim that she'd been coerced into the whole scheme. But Janet had been recording everything, and the evidence from Marcus's laptop showed months of planning and coordination that made it clear Sophia had been a willing and active participant. The police arrived about 20 minutes later and arrested both Sophia and Marcus on charges of conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, and attempted grand larceny. Ryan, it turned out, was actually just an innocent victim in all this. He really was Sophia's ex-boyfriend from college, and she'd contacted him as part of creating an alibi for why she was acting strangely before the wedding. She'd told him I was abusive and controlling, and that she needed him to come to the hotel to help her escape. The irony was that Ryan had actually come to the hotel planning to talk Sophia out of going through with whatever scheme she was running, because he'd figured out that something wasn't right when she'd contacted him out of nowhere after 3 years of silence. The flowers and champagne were supposed to be props to make it look like they were having an affair, so that if anyone caught them together, they'd assume it was just cheating rather than something more serious. William and I spent the rest of the night giving statements to the police and working with Janet to secure our financial accounts and make sure Marcus and Sophia hadn't already managed to steal anything. It turned out they'd been planning to make their move during the honeymoon, when we'd be out of the country and it would take longer for anyone to notice unusual account activity. The wedding was obviously canceled, but that turned out to be the least of our concerns. Over the next few weeks, the investigation revealed that Marcus and Sophia were part of a criminal network that had been operating across multiple states, and that they'd successfully stolen over $2 million from previous victims. William and I were actually lucky that we'd caught them before they'd had a chance to complete their plan. The consequences kept rolling in over the next few months like aftershocks from an earthquake. Sophia was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to multiple counts of fraud and conspiracy. Marcus got 8 years because of his previous convictions and his role as the ringleader. Several other members of their network were arrested in different states as the investigation expanded. William ended up hiring a full-time security consultant to review all of his business and personal accounts, and he discovered that Marcus and Sophia had been gathering information about his finances for over a year. They'd managed to get copies of his tax returns, business loan applications, and even his estate planning documents, all through Sophia's access to his house and personal information. As for me, the whole experience completely changed how I think about relationships and trust. I'd been so focused on the emotional connection I thought I had with Sophia that I'd ignored all the practical red flags that should have warned me something was wrong. The fact that she'd never introduced me to any childhood friends, that she was always vague about her past, that she seemed to know more about my financial situation than I'd ever told her. 6 months later, I started dating again, but with a much more cautious approach. I met Christina through a hobby group rather than through any kind of setup, and we took things extremely slowly, getting to know each other's families and friends before making any serious commitments. The experience with Sophia taught me that real love requires real honesty, and that anyone who's unwilling to be completely transparent about their past probably has something to hide. The strangest part of the whole situation was learning that I'd actually been living with a stranger for 3 years. The Sophia I thought I knew, the woman I'd fallen in love with, had never existed. She was a carefully constructed character designed to manipulate my emotions and gain my trust, and every moment of our relationship had been part of a long-term plan to steal from me and my future father-in-law. But in a weird way, discovering the truth saved me from something much worse than just a bad marriage. If we'd gone through with the wedding, I would have lost not just my money but potentially years of my life trying to figure out why my wife was acting strangely and why our finances kept having problems. Instead, I got a clean break and a valuable education about how sophisticated modern criminals can be. The whole experience taught me that sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened, even if you can't see it at the time. Catching Sophia the night before our wedding saved me from years of financial and emotional manipulation and gave me the tools I needed to recognize and avoid similar situations in the future. And that's the story. If you're still here, that means you're one of us. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button. I drop new chaos every single day, and trust me, tomorrow's story, it's even worse than this one.